All right, let's get right into it. We're going to look at a government audit that, on the surface, looks like a simple story about a billing mistake. But if you dig a little deeper, it asks a really big question about how we deal with failure. So take a look at this number, $1.2 billion. Now, that's not a tech company's valuation or some movie's box office haul. No, this is the estimated value of billing errors, just errors, in Medicare home health services in a single year. It's a huge number, and it really sets the stage for why even the smallest mistakes can matter a whole lot. So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with that massive billion-dollar national issue. Then we'll zoom way in on a specific audit that happened in Dayton, Ohio. We'll see what the inspectors actually found, get into the cause, what the company called human error, and finally, see what this whole thing can teach us about learning from our mistakes.
Okay, so where in the world does $1 billion in errors even come from? Well, first, you gotta understand just how massive the system we're talking about is. It is a huge and honestly essential part of healthcare in America.
This chart really helps put it all in perspective. In 2023 alone, Medicare paid out something like $16 billion for home health services. That's across nearly 10,000 different agencies. And see that smaller bar next to it? That's the $1.2 billion in what are called improper payments.
Right, so what does improper even mean here? It's really important to get this. It's not always fraud, not by a long shot. More often than not, it's just an error. It's a failure to follow one of the many complex rules. Think of it as a mistake in the paperwork, not someone trying to pull a fast one.
So how do you even begin to tackle a $1.2 billion problem? Well, you can't fix it all at once. The government's Office of Inspector General, the OIG, does these audits all over the country, kind of chipping away at the problem. And our story today zooms in on just one of those.
And the subject of this particular audit was a provider called Alternate Solutions Homecare of Dayton. They were picked as part of this whole nationwide series of reviews to just check and see if they were following all the Medicare rules. The OIG focused on a 2-year period, looking at all the billing claims from 2022 to 2023. And, these things take a while. The final report, with all the details and findings, didn't actually come out until early 2026. So after all that, what did they actually find? Well, the auditors took a random sample, just 100 claims, to get a quick snapshot of how the company was doing overall. And the results were pretty interesting. Turns out the company was getting things right almost all the time. 96 out of those 100 claims, totally fine. The problem was with that tiny little slice, the remaining 4%. So this wasn't some story of a massive failure. It was about a few, very specific, isolated errors.
And what was the total dollar amount for those 4 incorrect claims? Was it millions? Thousands? Nope. It was just $940. And this is such a key detail, because it tells you the audit wasn't really about clawing back money. It was about figuring out why the process failed at all.
The errors themselves were all procedural stuff, things like using the wrong billing code, or maybe not meeting some specific reporting rule for a patient's assessment. These are the kinds of classic administrative mistakes that can happen in pretty much any complex system.
And this, right here, brings us to the real heart of the issue. Why did these simple mistakes happen in the first place? The OIG went to the company and asked them to explain.
And this is their answer, pulled straight from the report. They chalked it up to 2 things: staffing shortages and human error. In other words, their people and their systems were stretched thin, they were under stress, and because of that, the normal checks and balances, the safeguards that are supposed to catch this stuff, they just failed.
And that is the key insight right there. Nobody was trying to cheat the system. It wasn't about bad intentions. Instead, the process itself broke down when it was put under pressure. The system that was built to catch human mistakes didn't work.
Okay, so if the problem is the process and not the person, how are you supposed to respond? This is where the story pivots from just finding a problem to actually trying to fix it.
This slide really lays out the 2 paths you can take. On one side, you can blame the person. That's the punitive approach, and it usually just makes people afraid to report errors in the future. Or you can choose to learn from the system. That's all about improving the process so the same mistake doesn't keep happening. I mean, which one of those sounds more productive?
Well, the OIG's recommendations pretty clearly chose that learn from the system path. First, they said, hey, refund the $940. Easy enough. But the second recommendation is the important one. They told the company to run its own internal audits to find and fix any other similar errors, basically to strengthen their own process for the future.
And the story ends on a really constructive note. The company completely agreed with the findings. They didn't try to fight them. They saw it as a chance to learn, and they laid out the exact corrective actions they were taking to fix their own internal safeguards. In the end, the system actually worked.
So this small audit in Dayton, Ohio brings us to this big universal question. It doesn't matter if it's healthcare or aviation or just our day-to-day jobs, when something goes wrong, our first instinct is often to find out who is to blame. But maybe this story suggests there's a more powerful question to ask. What part of the process allowed that mistake to happen? Because you can blame a person, or you can learn from a failure, but you really can't do both.